supplies around the house. In this video, I'll show you how to fix household items to plasterboard using just a wood screw and these Fischer Duopower wall plugs. I'll give you an overview of the wood screws and the wall plugs. I'll show you how and when to use them. I'll show you some common problems you're likely to encounter and how to overcome them, and I'll show you some tips and tricks along the way. If you're new to DIY and you've done your research, you know there are a vast amount of products on the market for carrying out this task, and choosing the right one can be quite overwhelming. And that's exactly why I narrowed it down to just one wall plug and one type of wood screw to keep this video as simple as possible. So although we're trying to fix the plasterboard, in real life working examples we're likely to encounter a few problems, and this is because plasterboard can be fixed to a wall in different ways. So generally speaking, there are two common ways that plasterboard is fixed to a wall. The first example is where it's screwed to a stud timber wall, and in this mock setup I've done here you can see the vertical stud timbers. In a real life example you'll have horizontal timbers as well, and the plasterboard is just screwed into the timbers using these plasterboard screws. So by here you'd have timber behind the plasterboard, and in between the timbers you'd have a void. And the other common method to attach plasterboard to a wall is called dot and dab, and this is where a plasterboard adhesive is mixed up, it's dabbed on the wall in blobs, and the plasterboard is stuck to the wall. This is used on a masonry wall, and when I say masonry I just mean something like brick, stone, concrete or another similar material. Now in this example, where the plasterboard is fixed to the wall with the adhesive, you'll have a solid substrate behind the plasterboard when the adhesive goes hard. Now between the blobs of adhesive you'll have a void, just like with the stud timber. And it's for this reason that my fixing of choice is the Fischer Duopower wall plug. And the reason I particularly like these plugs is they're specifically designed to work both in a plasterboard wall with a void behind it and a solid masonry wall. And quite simply, in a masonry wall it will bunch up and get really tight in that hole that you've drilled. And in a plasterboard wall, if there's a void behind it, it bunches up and pulls the plug tight onto the plasterboard. And it does this partly because it's got a nice little lip at the front of the plug, which I'll show you in a minute, and this allows it to compress onto the plasterboard, giving a really nice strong fixing. What I particularly like with these is that from a beginner's point of view, the box has all the instructions and all the details on it, making them extremely simple to use. So you can see here that this particular plug is a 6x30, and that just means that it's 6mm in diameter and 30mm in length. So turning the box over, you can see it tells you to use a 4 to 5mm diameter screw. It tells you to use a 6mm diameter masonry drill bit, and it tells you the hole you drill must be at least 40mm deep. So if you look at the top of the box, it shows you some different substrates the plugs can be used in and the maximum weights that the plugs will hold whilst using those substrates. So we've got anything from breeze block, which is up to 10 kilograms per plug, plasterboard up to 15 kilograms per plug, and solid concrete right the way up to 95 kilograms per plug. Another thing to note is these wall plugs do come in other sizes like these ones, and these ones are the 8x40, which again just means they're 8mm in diameter and 40mm in length. And if you're using the larger size wall plugs, just follow the directions as the size of the screw required is going to be slightly different, but it tells you all this information on the box. So my go-to wood screws are always Gold Screw Original, and that's because they work well, they're very cheap and they're readily available. And going back to the advice on the box, it says to use between a 4 and 5mm diameter screw. So in this example I've gone smack bang in the middle and I'm using the 4.5mm diameter screw. Now just to explain your screws quickly, on a metric size screw like this, the 4.5 there just represents the diameter of the screw, and the 50mm just represents the length of the screw. So with this particular screw, it's 50mm in length and it's 4.5mm from one side to the other. And the other important thing to note is when choosing your wood screw to go with this wall plug, you need a thread that goes all the way to the top of the screw. So now I'm going to show you how to use this wall plug, but before we start, let me just quickly show you the tools you're going to need. So first of all, you're going to need a battery powered drill, then you're going to need your 6mm masonry drill bit to go in the drill and create the hole. We're going to need an impact driver and or a handheld screwdriver. Now when using either of these, it's important to get the right tip. On these specific screws they're Pouse Drive 2, so we either need a PZ or Pouse Drive 2 tip on your screwdriver, or you need to use a PZ2 or Pouse Drive bit for your impact driver. If you're using different screws, then you need to use the appropriate bit or screwdriver for those screws. Then we have our hammer for tapping the wall plugs into place, and we have our chosen wall plugs and screws. So we put our 6mm masonry drill bit into the drill, tighten the chuck, and let's just say, first example, we drill in by here, and you get there and you hit a piece of timber. So what do you do next? Well, we're not going to be able to use the plug obviously because there's timber there. Now in this scenario it's extremely simple. Because we're using wood screws and this is wood behind the plasterboard, we can just use the wood screw without using the plug. So using the Pouse Drive bit in the impact driver, I place the screw into the hole and I can just drive that in as far as I need to drive it in. Now obviously if you're just hanging a picture, you could just hook that over the screw as it is, and that'll be perfect. If you need to secure something to the wall, put whatever it is you want on the wall up against the wall and tighten the screw into it. So say for example you were attaching a lamp like this, we would just remove the screw, rotating it anti-clockwise. So take your lamp, place the screw through a fixing hole like that. Offer that up into the hole you've just made through the plasterboard, and then you would just drive this screw through. And that would then hold the lamp in place. Obviously you need to put in as many screws as the fixing requires. So now the second scenario you could come across on a stud timber wall is this one. We take the drill, we drill a hole, and you're straight through. There's a big void behind it. In this scenario we just use the wall plug. So then take your wall plug, just push it into the hole like that as far as you can, and you'll find that when you're pushing you won't be able to get it all the way in because of this slightly chamfered edge. This is why we then use the hammer to tap it into place, making sure that this lipped edge is flush and flat with the plasterboard. Then just take your screw, offer it into the wall plug, and then tighten up using either the impact driver or the screwdriver. Now if you're fixing a delicate object to the wall, it's always good to use the impact driver so far and then just finish it off with your handheld screwdriver. And again, if you leave the screw slightly proud like that, we could hang a picture on it, something like that. If you need to bring it out a little, just bring it out like that. Or if we're fixing something like the lamp I just showed, we do the same thing again. Remove the screw, we take the screw, place it through the hole in whatever you're fixing to the wall, line the screw up into the plug like that. We can always turn it in by hand to get it going if you like, and then just tighten up. And that will hold that lovely and tight to the wall. Now according to what you're fixing to the wall, you'll need to alter the length of your screw. So if the object is deeper, you want a longer screw. If it's thinner, you need a shorter screw. So like with this batten, we need the screw to be deeper than the batten, but we also want it to poke through the end of the plug as well. So when we place the plug behind the batten, we can see that the screw's not quite long enough, so we need to use a longer screw. So here I've now still got a 4.5mm diameter screw, but this one is 60mm in length. So if you hold that next to the batten and now place the screw in place, that is about perfect. So just like before, we can place our screw into the timber and offer it up. Obviously in this case I've already drilled a pilot hole, and that is by using a thin wood drill bit straight through the timber to allow the screw to pass freely. Then if we just drive this through a little bit first, you can just see the tip of the screw poking through there. We can offer that up to the plug, like so. And you can see that is lovely and solid with only one screw. As I showed a minute ago, we can undo this screw and the plug will still stay in place so we can reuse it later, which is unlike some other plasterboard fixings where they can only be used once and they fall down the back when you remove the object. Now the beauty of using these plugs is if you went through the plasterboard and there was a void and then you hit some masonry like a brick or concrete block behind it, is all you do is keep drilling with your masonry drill bit deeper than the length of the plug, and if the plug had to sit into that because the void is not very deep, then it would quite happily do that, push into the masonry, and then you can just screw the screw in exactly the same way that we just did. And I'll show you that a little bit in the example on the dot and dab I'm about to do now. So here I've done another mock setup just to explain the dot and dab process to you. You have your masonry wall. In this example we've got a clay brick. The adhesive is placed on in blobs like that. The plasterboard is pushed onto the adhesive, and then the adhesive goes hard, binding the plasterboard to the wall. Directly behind the plasterboard where the adhesive is present, you've got now a hard solid substrate all the way through the wall, and in between the blobs of adhesive you get a void just like with the stud timber. So again, with the dot and dab, there's a few scenarios we could encounter. One is we go through the plasterboard, hit some solid adhesive behind and straight into the masonry or brickwork. The other is we could go through the plasterboard and there'll just be one large void and we won't touch any masonry. Or finally, we could go through the plasterboard with a small void and find that we hit some masonry behind. So just like last time, we go into the wall. We find we hit some solid adhesive behind. Don't worry, just keep drilling the full length of your plug. And then if you hit the masonry, just keep going, and by using the masonry drill bit, it's designed to keep that hole going through the brickwork. Then as before, just take your Duopower plug, place it into the plasterboard, tap with a hammer, then take your screw, start it off and tighten up. And again, we can either leave that slightly proud for hanging a picture, or you can put a fixture on it and screw it tight to the wall. You'll probably notice some of this has moved. That's just because I've just used the filler to replicate the plasterboard adhesive and it's still a bit soft. So next scenario, very similar, but we go through here, there's a void, and then we hit masonry. We just do exactly the same thing. So you drill through, you notice there's a gap, but you realise that the depth that we've gone to isn't deep enough for our wall plug. So you see there, we still need an extra 5mm of depth, so we're going to have to go on into the masonry work. Then take your plug, place it into the hole, tap the plug into place, start your screw off, then drive the screw into the wall. And again, you can either leave that slightly proud for hanging a picture or something like that, or attach your fixing inside and screw it tight to the wall. And finally, if your plasterboard is attached to your masonry with really large blobs of adhesive, we go through it with a drill, and we find that the void behind the plasterboard is large enough to accept an entire plug. Then we can just fix this plug to the plasterboard in exactly the same way we did earlier on the stud timber with the void. So earlier in the video I showed you how to select the right size screw for the job, but it's also very important that the hole you drill is slightly deeper than the penetration of the screw. So if the hole's not deep enough, what will happen is your screw will hit the wall and it will start to drive your plug back out. So a simple way to ensure that we drill the right size hole is to take your drill bit and your plug and place the two tips together like that. Then if we know that we need to add, say, another 10mm to the length of this plug, mark that off on your drill bit like that. Then take a bit of insulation tape, place that where you've marked a point with your thumb, and wrap that around your drill bit like that. We now know that when we drill into the wall, when the wall meets that insulation tape, we've gone deep enough. And I'll show you an example of why that's so important now. So I drill there. Now although I've drilled that hole deep enough to accept the plug, as you'll see now, it may not be deep enough for your screw. So just to over exaggerate this, I'm using a particularly long screw, and you can see what happens to the wall plug now. So once it hits the brick, you'll see how it's going to try and pull the plasterboard off the brick. And this is because once the screw hits the masonry, it can't go any further. So in effect, as you turn it, you're actually driving the plasterboard and the plug back. And you can see in this example, because the plug is so strong, it's actually tried to pull the plasterboard off rather than drive the plug out. So this is a very real example and can happen. You can cause more damage than good when you're doing this the wrong way. So as it turns out, I've ended up showing you how to use wall plugs in a masonry wall as well as plasterboard, but I have done another video specifically on how to use wall plugs in a masonry wall, and if you want to watch that, you can click on the link that will pop up on the screen now, and I'll put a link to that in the description section below. If you're interested in any of the products and tools used in the video, I'll put a link to those in the description section below. And finally, if you found the video useful, please give it a like, and don't forget to subscribe to my channel, press the bell icon for regular notifications. I've been Pouse around the house. Ta-ta, farewell.